his opposite be?
Loud.
Mr. who?
Loud.
Mr. Noisy. Remember Mr. Noisy? Some of you might not have been here last week. Okay.
Teacher Colleen, I have a Mr. Man book at home. I also made a man book. Me too. I've got one.
Yep, that's right. Exactly. Okay, so be ready for a very quiet voice. Mr. Quiet. Ready? Mr. Quiet liked the quiet life. He lived quietly in a small little cottage in the middle of a wood. The problem was, that small little cottage was in the middle of a wood, in the middle of a country called Loud Land. Everything and everybody in Loud Land was noisy. Oh, the noise. So do you think Mr. Quiet liked living there?
No.
That's definitely the opposite. Dogs didn't go woof like dogs do. They went, and you're going to take a deep breath and go woof. People didn't shut their doors like you and I would, or like you and I would shut the doors. They slammed them with a big boom. People didn't talk to each other. They shouted at each other. Hello, they would shout. And you've heard about something being as quiet as a mouse, have you? Well, not in Loudland. They had the noisiest mice in the world. They would go Mr. Noisy would have liked living in Loudland. He would have loved it. But Mr. Quiet didn't. Noise frightened him. So he stayed in his cottage in the middle of his wood as much as he could. I think I would do the same.
He said when he needs to get food.
But of course, he couldn't stay there all the time. Every week, for instance, he had to go shopping. He used to creep into the grocer's shop. "Good morning," bellowed the grocer. "What can I do for you?" "Please," whispered Mr. Quiet, "could I have some cornflakes, please?" "What?" "Cornflakes, please," he whispered. "Speak up." Mr. Quiet tried his loudest whisper. "Cornflakes." "Can't hear you," shouted the grocer. "Next, please." And poor Mr. Quiet had to creep away without any cornflakes. It wasn't very fair, was it? He crept into the butcher's. "Please," he whispered, "I'd like some meat." The butcher didn't even hear him. He was humming to himself loudly and fiercely. Mr. Quiet tried again. "Please," he whispered, "I'd like some meat." The butcher started to whistle. It sounded more like a burglar alarm than a whistle. Mr. Quiet fled, empty-handed. It often happened, which probably explains why he was so little. Poor Mr. Quiet.
He's crying.
Sure. He sat at home that night with a feeling of despair. Gosh, that's sadder than sad. Whatever am I to do, he thought. It's no use, he thought. I'll just have to try again. And so the following day he went shopping again.
Yeah.
But the same thing happened.
He has to steal megaphone again.
Maybe. "Can't hear you," thundered the grocer. "Next, please." "Can't hear you," bellowed the greengrocer. "Next, please." "Can't hear you," roared the milkman. "Next, please." "Can't hear you," boomed the butcher. "Next, please." Oh dear. Poor Mr. Quiet went home and went to bed very hungry.
Now all of them is making me very angry.
The morning after, he was awakened by a noise which sounded like bombs dropping. It was the Loudland postman knocking on Mr. Quiet's door. With a bang, 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 Mr. Quiet went and opened the door. "Morning," shouted the postman. "Letter for you." You can see how he's shouting in the picture, hey?
Letter for you. Morning, how are you?
Mr. Quiet.
Letter for you.
Mr. Quiet took the letter into his kitchen. He sat down to open it. He waited until the noise of the postman's footsteps died away with that clump, 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 clump. Mr. Quiet opened the letter in great excitement. He had never had a letter before. It was from Mr. Happy in Happyland. Actually, an invitation to stay. Mr. Quiet was overjoyed. He rushed upstairs and packed his bag and set off that very morning.
Mr. Quiet happy to announce tonight.
Hey, let's listen, yeah. It was late when he arrived on Mr. Happy's doorstep. He knocked on Mr. Happy's door with a little tap, tap, tap. Mr. Happy opened the door. Hello, he smiled. I thought I heard something. You must be Mr. Quiet. Well, don't just stand there. Come in and have some supper. Is he shouting?
No.
Doesn't look like it.
No.
It was the first proper meal Mr. Quiet had had for months. And while he was eating it, he told Mr. Happy all about the problems he'd been having in Loudland. Mr. Happy was most sympathetic.
What does that mean?
It means he was very nice to be listening to him. He was just feeling very sorry for him. Over breakfast the following morning, Mr. Happy told Mr. Quiet that he'd been thinking about his problem. I think, he said, that under these circumstances you'd better stay here in Happyland. Mr. Quiet's face lit up, and, continued Mr. Happy, we'll find you a house. And he went on, and a job. Mr. Quiet's face dropped again. I'm not very good at jobs, he confessed, because I'm too quiet. Ah, smiled Mr. Happy, I have the very job for a quiet chap like you. And so the very next day Mr. Quiet started work, and he loves it. Do you know where he works?
In the library.
You guys know the story. In the Happy Lending Library, where you have to be quiet. As you know, everybody who goes into a library has to be very quiet and only whispers aloud. What a clever idea from Mr. Happy, wasn't it? And these days Mr. Quiet is as happy as can be. Why, only the other day, do you know what he did on his way from work? He was so happy, he laughed out loud. Can you imagine it? Just a tee-hee-hee. Next, please.